This looks like a drawing of a house by a 5-year-old, but it's not. It's an actual drawing for a house built by one of the architects on our curriculum. You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it, but get ready for it. This is Robert Venturi, Denise Brown, and their buddy RAUCH. This is the house in Newcastle County, and this is a 20th century architecture bite. So, Robert Venturi is probably one of the most famous architects related to postmodernism, guys. Postmodernism, after modernism, which it's debated when it started, but 19 mid 1960s. So it kind of works out the timing here. In 1966, Robert Venturi wrote his first book, which was called Complexity and Contradictions in Architecture. Here's a double page spread from the book on the right. But in one chapter in particular, he pretty much makes his case. He called it a gentle manifesto, pretty much a gentle argument, that modern architecture, all that clean, sterile architecture from the early 20th century, like the previous houses on our curriculum, like the Villa Savoy and Falling Water, that design was over. It had run its course. It was done. It was boring. It was sterile. Time for something new. And ooh, Robert Venturi might have gone overboard just a little bit. So modern architecture, like Mies van der Rohe, they coined the phrase "less is more." But with postmodern architecture, the mentality is quite the opposite. Less is a bore. Postmodern architecture is all about bringing back old architectural elements and techniques in new ways. They use lots of color, and I mean lots of color. And it's overwhelming, and it's garish, and it needs to stop. Modern architecture had become too sterile, and it didn't really seem comfortable. So, postmodern architects, and Robert Venturi was one of the leaders of the postmodern architecture movement, wanted to change that. So Robert Venturi teamed up eventually in his career with a woman architect who eventually became his wife, and her name was Denise Scott Brown. And here's a photo of them together. They are both unfortunately now deceased. And again, they coined this phrase, less is a bore. So their designs gave birth to the postmodern architectural movement. But it is interesting to note that Venturi never liked the term postmodernism. There's a lot of people who don't like the term because people can't agree on what it means or when it started. It is a mashup of art historical references, and I mean a mash-up. Just like this slide is a mashup of fonts and colors, because that's what postmodernism is about. Lots of color. Nonsensical components to the design. Why is that there? That's a question you're going to be asking yourself a lot when you look at these buildings. It looks pretty tacky and kitschy. And they were also very inspired by a trip they took to Las Vegas in the 1960s, early 70s. And they actually wrote a book about it called Learning from Las Vegas. And even if you've even seen just pictures of Vegas or been there yourself, it's kitschy. It's a whole bunch of these references to other architectural styles from around the world coming together in this kind of garish city with all these lights and colors. And it makes sense that that would have appealed to them. So, in 1962, Robert Venturi designed his house for his mama, the Vanna Venturi House. It's near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And yeah, you might love it, you might hate it. I definitely like this one more than the one on our curriculum. But look, the windows aren't symmetrical, and why is this thing above the doorway, and why is there a cut in the middle here, and it's green, and that's not a very appealing green. And here it is from the side. It's strange. It's strange. And when you look inside, it's even stranger. Like the door looks like a door at school. The staircase is here, but oh, look at that. It goes nowhere. We have this random wall poking out, which totally I would trip on. We've got some crazy curves. Like this house isn't actually that bad with the color, but there's some nutso things going on inside of here. But our house is the house in Newcastle County in Delaware by Robert Venturi, John RAUCH, and Denise Brown. So it was a trio of architects, and this came a little bit later, the late 70s, early 80s. Wood frame and stucco. We have an exterior picture and an interior picture. And when you look at the exterior of this house, it looks childlike. It looks cartoonish, and it's not like anything we've seen before. So, postmodernism was all about mashups. Let's take references from other periods of art history and put them all together. Let's make some things small, let's make some things big. If something used to be fully three-dimensional, let's make it flat. Let's make something just not really make sense. And that's pretty much what this house is about. So there's a giant window because this family was bird watchers and they wanted a big window to see the birds. And then he puts this giant, like, rounded arch in front of it. These big, fat, Doric looking columns aren't actually columns, they're flat. This one over here goes halfway into the wall. This one over here is cut in half. It's strange. So rather than copy a specific style, they borrow freely, juxtaposing, collaging, and reinterpreting forms from distinct periods and places. Here is a view from the inside of the house outside of that big window for bird watching. You can see that they still get a pretty good view. And that outside kind of covering kind of maybe facades their movement a little bit from the birds who might fly away. This is the other side of the house, which also has like extra decorative elements. The inside has a whole bunch of different styles coming together. There's Victorian furniture. There's like a kind of southwestern colors going on. There's like mid 20th century kind of almost 70s or 80s style lighting. There's old, there's new, there's color, there's no color. You got all this different stuff going on. So postmodernism is essentially going as far opposite of the modern, clean, sterile architecture of the early 20th century as you can. Use as many art historical references as possible. Use as many colors as you possibly can. The more the merrier. And Robert Venturi really went overboard with it. Let's just put it that way. So a few other examples of postmodern architecture so we can see what it looks like. This is a plaza that is in, I believe it's in New Orleans, Louisiana. Check out all those different references to art historical parts and pieces and all those different colors. It kind of looks like a stage design for theater or something like that. This is a famous governmental building in Portland, Oregon. Look at the weird shaped tiny windows. There's like a reference kind of sort of to a column on the side of the building. There's color, there's like pink and reds and lots of stuff going on. Very famous set of postmodern buildings in Florida. This is the Swan and the Dolphin Hotel in Disney World. Very POMO. Lots of color, lots of different references to architecture happening, lots of different designs. Before I even knew I loved art history as a little kid, I remember seeing these hotels and I was like, wow, I hate those so much. But some of you might like it. To each their own. These are some little apartment houses that are very POMO. This is a famous kind of postmodern building in New York City where we can see like there's this reference to like a pediment shape at the top, but then they cut a hole in it. It looks like a big piece of furniture, like a chest, like a Chippendale chest or something. That's the AT&T building in New York City. So guys, postmodernism is interesting for sure.